Okay, I think we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Erasmus Expeditions. We are here tonight with episode 48 of the Help Action podcast. I'm really excited. I haven't done one of these in a little bit. And before that, it had been a very long time since I had done one. So I'm excited to kind of be working these back into the rotation of what's on the channel. I love having these kinds of conversations. I love meeting people from throughout the community and kind of like making connections with everybody, like connecting different spheres of people. I've met some of my best friends in the world doing that. So I'm super, super excited to have my next guest on this evening. Danesh, you son of a bitch, how are you?
Man, I am great. I'm excited to be here. It's been, I don't know, like a decade or so since I've been on a podcast. So excited
Nice.
to have the airwaves feature the sultry voice again.
It is. It's a beautiful voice. I love it. You and I met all that. Not that all. This is a professional show, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, not that long ago, you and I first met. But there was definitely a little bit of a chemistry. We had a lot in common. We seemed to, and a lot of the same takes about gaming and stuff like that. And you mentioned that you had done a podcast, and it made me remember, hey, I have a podcast. And I was really happy that you agreed to come on. So tonight we are going to be talking about encounters that count. So we'll get into that in just a little bit here. But for those of you who are new to Help Action is a place where we kind of sit down and we do a little bit of an interview, a little bit of a topic discussion about tabletop role-playing games, and then take some audience Q&A for anybody who may be tuning in this evening and wants to drop questions in the chat while we are talking. If you do, just preface your question with question, real big capitals, so that way I can be sure to see it as it scrolls by in the chat, and then nab it and throw it on the screen here, and then we can get to it. So yeah, man. One of the questions that I like to kind of start with, or at least have early on in the episode, is how did you get into the hobby? Where did you find gaming? What was that story?
I think I was like either in 8th grade or my freshman year. And I had gone to a hobby store with my dad. So my parents were separated, and it's like spending Christmas with my dad. Dad's like, I don't know what you're into. I know you like nerdy things. I saw this cool nerdy store. You want to go check stuff out? At the time, I played Magic the Gathering, and I was like, maybe I'll go look at some cards. And then I went and was walking around and saw the 3rd edition like big box starter set, and I was like, oh, what is this? And I had not heard of Dungeons and Dragons or anything like that. And so I just see this cool box. I mean, I've always loved high fantasy, been reading fantasy books day and night, and it was cool. Then starter sets had or at least in that era had the minis and stuff in it too. So my dad's like, well, if we can get this, we can go all in, and got me the box set and like a brick of like the mini boosters. Yeah, had a player's handbook, and so at the time I was living in rural Iowa, right? So didn't have internet out there because you're in the middle of nowhere, but it's like the perfect kind of hobby for that, where you're just pouring through the pages of the books, looking at the minis, and just thinking about all this stuff. And a couple of my friends also thought it'd be fun, and maybe like once every 2 months we would have a weekend together, and we'd run like these crazy long sessions, getting all the rules wrong, but like just having so much fun, and just trying to fill out whatever fantasies. I mean, I was the DM then only because nobody else would do it as much as the DM story. Played it a few times, but really never got into it as much as a player then, because the players I played with had the internet, right, in the forums, and 3rd edition, and especially 3.5 was one of those where if you didn't know where you were going as a player with the right feats and skills and stuff, your character was so much worse than if somebody was like the chain trip fighter or something and getting like 7 attacks on a turn. So I was sitting there with my like one sneak attack with my halfling rogue, and feeling like, oh, I'm definitely playing a different game. But behind the screen, they can, even then, they can't see what I'm doing. They don't know what the monsters have. Let's just make some attacks and tell some stories. So I got into it then stopped playing after high school, but picked it up right before like that Christmas of 2019. Someone gifted me a box set for D&D 5th edition. I think it was the Rick and Morty one. And I was like, oh, okay. Let me look. I haven't touched, D&D in forever. The adventure was kind of weird, because it's Rick and Morty. But the rules, man, and I was like, all right, I got to do this. And, just put like a thing on Facebook, hey, who wants to play D&D? And I mean, I've been rocking with essentially the same group ever since.
That's amazing. It's a great story, and like I love hearing from all the different guests, like what brought them in, and it runs the gamut. Some people found it in the '70s, right off the bat, and have been playing it ever since. Some people, saw it early on, but it was always an older brother or somebody that wouldn't let them play with it. So they had to wait, and then they found it later on. But and then other people, they've been playing for 2 years. They just happen to find it because of Critical Role or any other number of things, and they've been very recent additions to the hobby. But I love hearing all the different ways that people have found their way to this little weird niche thing that we do, because it's a weird blend of socializing whenever you're antisocial, and it's got a lot of, especially in the beginning, there's a lot of hang up about playing pretend, about giving into the situation, investing in it, and really kind of just throwing yourself at it. And it's only, I think, whenever you kind of blend that with the aspects of a game that people are able to kind of drop their inhibitions a little bit more and get into it. The spirit of competition or self-challenge or success or what have you. It's just very, very fascinating to me.
Yeah, I was I was an improv and theater kid.
Yeah.
So I had no shame. So, doing funny voices was right up my alley. I would like read my books with funny voices to myself, to pass the time sort of thing. So it just made perfect sense.
Yep.
And now, it's still why I really enjoy it. And I think for me, the big thing is like, the mechanics are fun. I like the challenge of it. I mean, I run a very high power level game at home because my players are all very smart, right? And they're all hitting me with everything they got. So I like that, challenging aspect to it.
Definitely.
But there's just something about, like when you can really figure out like what makes every person kind of tick, right? And you're kind of bringing the things to them, and then you see like people who normally aren't into the whole pretend thing, right? They're just there to throw the dice and drink the beer, but then all of a sudden you haven't said anything or asked for a roll or anything, and your players are just in the world going at it with each other. Is one of my favorite moments, and you're just sitting back just enjoying it. And when you get that out of the person who was more reserved, but you figured out whatever it is they're into, and somehow they've taken the bait and they're in. I love that.
Well, and two, like I'm a big proponent for like comfort at the table, for everybody feeling like they really want to be there. It's inclusive and inviting. So having somebody who has a bit of a wall finally comfortable enough to let us in and kind of be goofy or be silly or be vocal, it's amazing to me. I think that's one of my favorite strengths of what this hobby really does. I mean, it does a lot of fun stuff, which is great, and it has have a good time doing it, but I genuinely believe that there's a lot of benefits, mental health, in social skills, things like that come from playing this game or these games.
Yeah, and so like especially something I've realized recently. So we met through this Barhaven, the local this D&D and bars thing, running games there. So every time that sometimes you show up and there aren't enough players, and so you get to hop in as a player if you want. So if the location's a little far, it's like whatever, I'm already drove out here, I'll play. I always bring like some sort of supportive character, right? And I really love like when there's those new players and you put a spell on them that like buffs them up, and you're just like, hey, go in there, let's go figure this out. And then you kind of see in them like unwrap the toy for the first time, kind of figuring it out and getting in there. So I mean I love that aspect. And like there's a guy there who the first game that he showed up, he was in one of my games, and he was real shy, didn't really speak that much. And then I think I've had either him at my table or been at a table with him about 4 or 5 times now. And now he's loud and boisterous and really getting into his own. So it's just great to see like, that can really open up to a person and, make them feel comfortable, when before, not so much, you don't know what's going on in their life and whatnot. So.
Yeah, true. Very, very true. Let's get to one of the first questions about the topic that I had, one of the talking points I wanted to bring up. And that is that I think, or at least I have seen a lot of your combat suck and here's why type posts and videos and stuff that kind of come up in the various circles of the community for whatever reason. And every time I see them, I hate them. And initially the issue for me is the clickbaitiness, of the title and the luring people in under like a hot topic type thing. But for me, I think often deeper the issue is that inevitably what they're talking about are purely mechanical things. It's why you should use a specific combination of abilities or features against this particular class, or why you should ignore the CR entirely, or whatever. But I don't see a lot of discussions about making your combats more meaningful or impactful. Do you also find that this is the case? And if so, why do you think that is?
I mean, I think I kind of stumbled into this on maybe, sort of on my own. Like the first campaign that I ran since getting back in the game, I like looked up, it's like, all right, which one of these books has got the highest rating? And so everyone's like telling me, yeah, Curse of Strahd or Tomb of Annihilation. And I was like, all right, well, let's flip a coin. Got Tomb of Annihilation, got the book, reading through. And it's just a lot of the times, it's like, oh, you got to run this encounter. And at that time, I would print out the maps, right? Like on paper, and like piece them together and whatnot and have them at the table. And it was just a lot of work for, it's like, what to me felt like, oh, well, this is just a random encounter. And then we're spending, an hour or so, because at the time, my players were also new to the game, right? So trying to figure everything out. I wasn't as great at like keeping the momentum going. And so like when you're fighting all of those things and then you're doing it for something that at the end of it, you rolled a die to see, what monsters showed up, and there was no reason behind it. I feel like you're making people wait around to do things, and yeah, it's kind of fun, but at the end, like you didn't get anywhere with it, right? So I get that there's a mechanical aspect, like you're supposed to drain your players' resources or whatever with certain numbers of encounters before long rests. And I mean, I got to the point where I just stopped caring. Like if they're just going to nuke all their stuff, they can nuke all their stuff. They can take a rest or whatever. But I'm very in that like heroic fantasy, right? There was a reason why you four are the one that are going and doing this, because there's something special about you. So why are we going to deal with like 4 bandits on the side of the road that are, if they see the things that you're doing, right? You're carrying these crazy enchanted weapons and altering the fabric of reality with your fingertips. Are they really going to just try to steal 12 gold off you, like when you're walking by? So why are they wasting their time in their lives? Am I wasting my time? So for me, the big thing is like, why is this encounter happening? Like, what's its purpose? Does it have narrative drive? Like, what are the stakes? I mean, I've only had one PC death in like the 4 years from high school, and I don't know what's up, 3 or 4 years running since. But it felt right because it was like a moment that character would like, oh, okay, I know the thing I'm going to do is very dangerous, but it's going to save everybody else in the party. So I'm going to do this thing. I know I'm probably going to die if I do this thing. But they did it, and like they didn't feel bad for dying because it allowed the party to win, and it was cool for them. But like if something happens where you roll badly, you fall off a cliff or something, and then you die because there were a couple bandits and a harpies because the dice told you there were a couple bandits and a harpies. That feels bad. And then you just spent 2 hours, and now this player's got to, figure out a new character situation for something that has zero impact on the narrative of the story. I mean,
then you have to try to shoehorn them into the story somehow.
Like, I don't think Lord of the Rings would have been, nearly as good of a story if all of a sudden, like, oh yeah, Sam ate a bad potato, rolled poorly on Constitution, got sick, and then just withered away and died. So that's why they didn't make it. Like there's no, it doesn't make sense. So if we're trying to tell ourselves that we're here to tell a story, then like, why are we putting obstacles in a way of telling that story that don't benefit really anybody?
Right. And I'm of a very, very similar mindset. I've gotten to where a lot of the games that I play now, combat it still happens, but it doesn't happen anywhere near as frequently.
Mm-hmm.
There's not the 12 encounters before a long rest or whatever calculation it is that the book says you're supposed to have. And the thought of trying to have that many fights every single day of an adventurer's life or whatever, just, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Why would you go do it?
Right. Yeah, exactly. How many people have such terrible communication skills or diplomacy that it ends in bloodshed, like every single time? And not just that, but a fight to the death every single time. Mm-hmm. So, I like having fewer fights, and because I have fewer encounters, I prefer to make them really memorable. There's got to be a really good reason why this has come to blows, and it's taking place in a specific place. And I think for me, one of the ways to make encounters count is largely what you're looking for is to get emotional investment from your players. Mm-hmm. That's really what you're kind of looking for. That's how to make a meaningful or impactful combat. But if you're having combat simply for the sake of having combat, it doesn't typically make for very memorable moments. Mm-hmm. You don't really hold on to the 16th time that you've killed a kobold just because there's too many of them in this cave or whatever. And I think that on the flip side of that coin, if you have a bad guy who's been dogging the party here and there and comes from one of the player characters' backstories, and then they finally get to meet their nemesis and give them retribution, those are the kinds of moments that a player will be talking about 20 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I feel you. I have players though that are there more for, like my wife. My wife's at my table. She'll roleplay a little bit. But she does love combat. She's, as many dice as I can pick up and shake and throw. That's why she's there, right? So, and she's got her little dice goblin addiction, so she wants to use them all. So like I usually have a combat, at least one in every session. My sessions are kind of lengthy because we play once a month. So, it's probably around like 5 hours, 6 hours. So, we'll have one, maybe two combat sessions, but I do make sure, there's a reason why we're fighting, or it's like, there's memorable things to do, because very rarely is it just, here's the grid, here's some people, let's go at it. I love like big environmental things happening.
Yes.
And especially in this campaign that I'm running, the type of like things that they're fighting, it's less just people throwing themselves to the death. So the world is like based on like Japanese mythology, and so there's stuff like coming through from like the spirit world, right? And they're taking corporeal form, but they're not really, like, if they die up here, they're still fine. So like if I throw like hordes of these little guys at them, they're fine fighting to their quote unquote death, because there's it's not there for them, but the stakes are there for like the players, right? So there's cool stuff that you can do with the environment, like big towers and like, you know, the little puzzles and fights during puzzles. I love encounters that have multiple ways in the encounter besides just combat. So the combat's there to like add pressure to, you know, this thing is going to go off in 10 turns or what, or, you know, X amount of turns, or you're trying to figure out this puzzle, but these things will, you know, obviously stop you from doing that. Or they're also, this group's also trying to get to the same goal that you're trying to get to. So I like having that stuff. So it's not just let's beat these people to a pulp. And when there's actual, like, you know, NPCs, sometimes, you know, my players now have like gotten to the point where, you know, like, hey, let's, you know, we've beaten them down a bit. Maybe we can get some information out of them or something. Also, there's a book, The Monsters Know What They're Doing. I forget the author's name, and he's got a few of them. But that one was huge for me because it doesn't make sense, you know, like a bandit's going to put his life on the line for, you know, his meal for the day. So it has like lists of like what these monsters and creatures, like what their motivations are, like how they would fight. So, you know, even though you're using different stat blocks, are they really feeling different? Like if you look at a kobold and a goblin stat block, like on its face, they look very similar, right? But like the way that they fight, it's a lot different if you think about like where they're coming from. Like kobolds, they're crafty little guys, right? You know, they make traps, they've dug all these tunnels, so they're going to use so much of their environment together. And you know, goblins fight in hordes and, you know, are doing a lot of guerrilla tactics of hit and run. So like they're definitely probably not going to fight to the death. They're going to fight until it looks like, oh, well, this isn't going our way. Let's cut our losses and get the heck out of here. And I feel like even if it's a random encounter at that stake, but it feels different than just here's 3 minis on the table, surround and, you know, do your abilities until the minis disappear and then move on with your life.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely hear you. And again, like I love playing with, you know, miniatures and terrain and stuff like that. I love real tactical combat. Again, you know, my home group, that's mainly what they focus on. There isn't a strong focus on role playing. But I have found that I really, really enjoy when I can marry the two together. You know, when I can make a fight really impactful, or at least like you're talking about, flavorful, memorable. It's different versus you know, having a combat that is very focused on the mechanics and like making sure that you strategize and all these kinds of things. I enjoy both very much. So yeah, when I can combine them, that makes me really happy. I played a fighter who started off with a very interesting mechanical build that I thought I would enjoy as a player. And then coming up with the whys and the hows and all that kind of stuff, I really kind of fell in love with like his backstory. And so then I got the chance to role play a character that I felt strongly about his story and his arc, but also he was mechanically really fun to play at the table. And that was a really big eye opener for me. I was like, why can't I just do the same thing as a dungeon master?
Right. I like also like increasing some of the stakes. I think I was talking to you about this before, that, you know, especially in games where like I'm, you know, it's all homebrewed, you know, story and whatnot, trying to get like, you know, the bad guy to feel like he's like a threat or whatever, and to feel like current and around. That, you know, recently, I mean, I'm lucky that, you know, I messaged my players ahead of time. I was like, hey, I'm gonna do something, gotta trust me. You know, but just want to, you know, get the okay that, you know, it's probably gonna feel weird, but trust me. And if you're not cool with, you know, this unknown, that's fine. Well, you know, we won't do it, but I think it's gonna help, you know, but kind of leaving it like that. But one of the characters, he's secretly an Oni, right? And the party doesn't know. And then one of the like antagonizing forces is a group of Oni that's trying to like slowly take over. And so the character's brother is like one of the lieutenants in the force. And so they've run into him at, you know, some location that they're in, trying to, you know, find the MacGuffin, right? And the brother recognizes him through his illusion. And he's like, oh, you're going to stand up to me? You're not even worth my time. And like just kills him instantly. Like it was just, you know, one shot you down, and then multi-attack on them, you know, while you're on the ground, kills you, throws a diamond at his feet, and just tells the party, he's like, hey, when you're actually worth my time, come see me again. And then just, moves on. And at that point, they were just like, what the heck just happened? Who the hell are these guys? We kind of knew there were some things going on. And then, that player now, I use that, the help dice, or not help dice, lucky dice, I think is the name of the mechanic from DM Scotty. So like when you're failing rolls, you get these D6s that you can save up to add to checks and attacks and stuff. So now, anytime he fails, he's happy because he's taken one of these D6. He's got a dice bag that he's holding. And I think he's got, 10 or 12 right now because he doesn't care about anything else. Is like, but the second he sees his brother again, he is just unloading all of them on him to try to do the same thing to him and, drop a diamond on his foot and tell him to come back. So like, I feel like, if it was just a stat block of like, yeah, this is a bad evil guy, in that encounter, it wouldn't have had that impact or had that drive for the character to like, yeah, this is why we're pressing forward. Like his character is an evil character. And the reason why he's with this adventuring party is because he's trying to get himself stronger now so he can, get back at his brother. So he's helping the good guys out because he doesn't care what the end goal between those forces are. He just, I want to kill my brother, but I'm not strong enough to kill my brother. So I'm going to help these guys out until then. And I mean, I don't think you can easily have, like an evil character going around like that if you're just fighting other random, chunks of hit points.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I couldn't agree more, man. Like it's amazing when what happens because of the combats propels the story forward.
Mm-hmm.
It puts the characters in a new place, in a new headspace, even.
Right.
And the way that a combat can play out can even advance the story. If the person was supposed to be captured and someone in the party kills them, there's going to be someone else at the table, more than likely, that is going to immediately go into roleplay mode. What are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why did you do that? So it builds really great inter-party moments.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes if you build the combat around what's happening well. But what are ways that we can make sure that encounters do end up more than just a battle of attrition that focuses on draining hit points and resources? And how do we make sure that there's more of a reward that is taken away from these fights than merely just XP?
For me, talking and role playing while you're in combat is free, right? So, I mean, to an extent, right? You can't 2-minute monologue or 3-minute monologue for a bit, but it's harder for the players to feel like that attachment, or even know what the bad guy's into, or what's going on, or the personality outside of like stealth missions and trying to like listen to something from outside of the room when he can like play with his food, right? If he's super powerful and can just taunt them as they're doing things, rather than just saying, oh, the guy casts counterspell on you, right? You're describing how he's eating up your spell and taunting you with it and moving around. And then when you are showing that, right, that you're doing these things, then sometimes the players will mimic, right? So they'll look for more narrative-y things that they can do during combat, like in even cinematic things, like, oh, you know what? You said there was like a cool table, I want to try to jump over this table and kind of flip it and hide behind this table now to do that stuff. So when I like showing, my players like, hey, there's mechanics, right? But at a certain point, like we're here to have fun. So if I do something, it's like, I'll figure out the rules right there. And if you have an idea, just tell me what it is what you're wanting to do. We'll figure out a way to make it fun, make it cool, if there's a role for it. So I like doing stuff like that because then they do it and then they're having fun. And then it gets, say the party face person more engaged in combat, right? Whereas if it's a bard who's not really combat heavy and who's like, oh yeah, I mean, I guess I'm going to cast Bane and, I'll get this guy inspiration. But if the role play is the thing that player likes, but then the role play just doesn't stop. I mean, because initiative is rolled and they can keep going. Because I've played in games where, it's very letter of the rules. Like, I mean, you can do that, but if you do an ability check, like a persuasion check, well, that's your action. And you're like, oh, well, I want to try to calm down the hey, I don't know what's going on. We started attacking each other, but if you're trying to defuse the situation, but then you're looking like, well, if I fail this check, my whole turn is gone, or I can attack the guy 3 times. So if you're just going by the rule book, your players are just going to do the thing that gives them more options and more things to do. But I hand wave a lot of rules like that away to make stuff happen. So for me, you want to chat with the guy, you want to talk to the person while you're talking to them, by all means do it. They'll respond back and whatnot in kind. And I mean, it's been nothing but great for me. I've never looked back.
Yeah, very much the same. Like I run a game that is set in a Baroque period, like based heavily on like France and Spain and Venice. So like especially during sword fights, I want there to be conversation, because every single piece of fiction that I've ever consumed that takes place in a Baroque period, that's exactly the way the sword fights play out. It is every bit wordplay as it is swordplay. So why would I cut my legs out from underneath me and discourage people from doing that kind of play? It's there's a lot about the system that I really love, but I am perfectly comfortable with taking what I want from a system and throwing the rest in the garbage. And I definitely will.
I mean, it's a guidebook, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. And having, like you were talking about earlier, like mini games where the mechanics are going to work a little bit different, but just for the first 2 hours or whatever that we play tonight, or just for this session.
Right.
I had a game that I ran that sounds a little similar to the one that you were just describing, where it was all based on kind of wuxia and Eastern Asian history and cultures and folklore and stuff. And one of the story beats was that the entire party was going to be made up of members from these 2 rival clans that had to work together for a common goal. And so I told them at the very beginning, you have to be a part of one of these 2 clans. I would prefer that it was about 50-50, but it doesn't have to be, just as long as we have both represented. And so they kind of talked amongst themselves and they split down the middle. And I ended up running 2 previous premiere sessions before the first session, 2 session 0.5s or whatever you want to call them, where I took each of the groups, the players from this one clan and the players from the other clan, and I only had one represented at the session at a time. So the first session was one clan, the second was the other clan. And I told them, we're not going to be playing your characters for the main game. You're going to be playing these pre-rolled characters that I came up with. Or no, I had them make additional characters.
Okay.
But they were ancestors of this clan, and they were playing through this historic moment where this thing had been lost. And the great thing was I played both of those sessions through that same event, and they played entirely different. The outcome was different.
Oh, okay.
Entirely.
So then they have different ideas based on what their clan's history is. Right? Exactly. Oh, that's really cool.
The way it was told was that we were the heroes.
I got a little shivers.
XYZ happened. And the other people were like, no, that's not how it happened at all. And for them, it's a truth, because they played through it.
Yes,
but
that's really cool.
It led to some really great moments about the conflicts that arose because of their disagreements about the truth of this historic event. But again, if the table wasn't comfortable with playing like completely different characters and they had just spent all this time putting together, if they had said, no, I'd rather not, like we couldn't have done any of that.
That's really cool. I have a session coming up next weekend, which of course I haven't done anything for. And so I'm thinking, what am I going to do? And they're at this point where so there's kaiju in my game, right? And kaiju just got released, and so they're in this oh shit moment, like what are we? Obviously, we can't just go fight these things, right? That's not going to work. They're 6th or 7th level, so fighting Godzilla not going to happen. So they're like seeking out this guy that they just were in like some library, found some old history of the kaiju, that there's some guy who had used some technique to bind them before, right? And so they're seeking out somebody who's, like the last disciple of, that sort of temple or whatever, to figure out what's happening. And I was thinking of doing something similar to that, of when they're in this like mystic little desert area, and they get there and then just take away their character sheets and just hand them new ones of them like playing out what had happened there. And I my only hesitation was, is there that sense of like danger or whatever for them because they know things worked out? Because they kind of know that history, and that's like my only apprehension. But I think it would be cool to just for them to like relive the past and experience that in that way, and then even then they sort of have like, I know what kind of the in-state is, but they get to craft, I guess, how it goes there, and then then what the process is to seal these things. And
Absolutely. And again, there's always the the fallback of the unreliable narrator. Like just because your character thinks that this is the truth doesn't necessarily make it so.
right.
And ancient history is hardly recorded accurately. So who knows if what you think is the truth is actually the truth or not. Or we're in a fucking universe where like multiple things, like multiple planes crisscross, and like time is not real, and it's perfectly fine. A wizard did it.
I really like that aspect, because that sort of story of feuding families or clans that are fighting over some event that happened a long time ago, and it's the oral traditions or whatever actually happened versus what they feel been told what's happened, and history's written by the victors, but they both feel like they won or whatever. I really, really think that's cool, because then, and especially if the players themselves have no knowledge otherwise, and like they've got that trust with you to run with that seems really, really cool.
Yeah, that campaign ended up being really, really amazing. Something I was very, very proud of. I think also one of the secrets is to, and you touched on this a little bit earlier, is that any fight needs to have stakes. It needs to be something that is in the balance. Something that is being threatened, that there should be a clear reason as to why it came to bloodshed.
Right.
Why talking was no longer an option. Bribery was no longer an option. Why are the two different parties willing to draw weapons and try to kill another thing or another person in order to try to stay alive? Are they willing to stay and risk their life for whatever's going on here? Most people in the real world, and again, some leniency because this is, storytelling and fantasy, but most people are not willing to die for very much in their life.
Right.
And having that aspect present in your game gives a lot of realism, a lot of grounding to your fantasy.
I think something that I've done, and I've been doing it a lot more recently, that's helped with this is like the characters will describe or something that they're doing or their plan, especially like when the characters are like getting their ridiculous plan together of how they're going to infiltrate something or how they're going to handle stuff, and they're all deliberating and they come to consensus. And I was like, just to summarize, we are going to then go in wearing the clothes of the guards in this building that has only 8 guards, and you're acting like them. Then they're going to go in to then act like you've been here forever to get past this thing. And when you simplify that stuff, like, oh yeah, that probably wouldn't work. Or, okay, if we are doing this, yeah, I can't really fight or, really get, in their face about stuff, because clearly then, what we're trying to do is not going to work or whatever. Or, something bad could arise from that. But I feel like just taking that step back, because all these small decisions keep getting added on and added on and added on. And like just reminding them, it's like, all right, let's zoom out a little bit. Here's where we are. Here's what, summarizing also what, you've explained to them and kind of reiterating, because something that I am trying to get better at is, even though I'm describing things to a person, right, and to the table, player A, B, and C might be grokking what I'm saying and visioning it the same way, but these other two aren't. But the differences between how they're doing it and how they're explaining it haven't really come up where either side is understanding that they're viewing things differently. And so they're just taking that step back. It's like, okay, so here's the situation. This person who's in this building, in this room, sees you guys doing X, and Y is your response. And then, you'll get like the players like, oh, you know what? That's not what I read the situation as. And then you get them back in there because sometimes, we get lost in the sauce of the mechanics and have to bring us back of like, is this why we're doing it? Is this really what we're going to do? I have no qualms if that's your guys' decision. I want to make sure I am understanding you, and I want to make sure you are understanding me, and we will proceed if that is the decision. And so ever since I've kind of stepped back and just done like, this is the declarative statement. Are we all okay with this? All right, let's proceed. I think there's been a lot more of like people buy, their characters doing things for the reason why their characters would do it. And not just like, yeah, I have this ability, let's do this ability and just keep trucking through. And so you get more of that. Oh yeah, this is where we are in the story. This is why we're doing this thing. I forgot for a bit because, we got sidetracked by this thing. We went shopping and did this thing. You got to bring them back towards the center.
Mm-hmm. I'm a big proponent for having meta conversations. Mm-hmm. Like it's okay to hit pause and go, all right, this is what's going on. Am I understanding that right? Or going into some kind of thing where it's like, okay, we're going to be doing a chase now, and this is how I want this to play out.
Mm-hmm.
Blah, 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 blah. Is that okay with everybody? Cool. Let's do it. Or I've gotten a lot of mileage out of doing I'm going to tell my players what I need from something, and then I'm going to let them give me the rest of the details.
Mm-hmm.
It's you in this particular scene. I'm looking for a conversation that your character brings up about their past, just anything about their past while they're making this long journey where they're traveling. Each one of you in turn, doesn't matter who goes who, what order, and you can have back and forth dialogue, but just each one of you tell me something that comes up that fits this particular need that I have for this scene. And then just let them do whatever they want, whether they want to tell a dramatic story or a comedic story, or, it doesn't really matter to me. It's just show us a little bit of who your character is. And I have found that helps. Creativity thrives whenever there are parameters, typically. So giving somebody a little bit of a parameter and saying, I need this from this particular thing, but it doesn't matter what fills this box. You do with that what you want. Most people can find creativity easier that way than if you just said, it's your turn in this scene, go.
Have you done this in combat before?
What's that?
Where you've set them up, you're giving them this little prompt, right? And something that can occur in combat. So I have these little minions that I use in this current campaign, and the one shots that I run for Barhaven are also in this world because it helps me like flesh out other areas and whatnot. So there are these little spirit warriors, right? And I would never have gotten this until I was like painting them, and I'm trying to figure out how to paint them because they have this flat mask on their face, right? And it's like almost oval in shaped, and jade has like a story mechanical meaning in this world, right? So they have jade around the mask, and I was like, I don't know what to fill this, and I kind of just left it blank because I got distracted and never ended up painting them. But then I got this idea of, well, part of what they're supposed to be doing in this part is they were serving this larger spirit who consumes fear, right? So it's like, how would they help this? So they're clearly trying to get fear out of things. So then I made a mechanic sort of thing where these little warriors, when they're directly in front of you and make eye contact with their mask sort of thing, when you're within 5 feet, what appears in the mask is your character's deepest, darkest fear, right? And so before even the saves are met or rolled or anything, it's like you look into it, you see the mist swirling. What is, Jaku's deepest fear, right? And then we just pause for a second. He's thinking about it. Then you kind of describe that thing happening. You do the save and, how they shrug it off. Or then, all of a sudden now, what how does your character handle that fear now that it's present? How would they react to this? And so then their playstyle with that character changed. There's some that were like, oh, my character just is stuck. He's not going to move. They're going to be too afraid that something bad is going to happen again, like that happened last time, whatever they said. So they don't want to do anything. Or another one just got like very, very aggressive because that's just how their character would respond to this thing, and want to make sure that thing's not going to hurt the party or whatever. But it was cool because now then everybody at the table got this little nugget of info from this character that you probably wouldn't have known that this character was like, oh, you heard about when they were abandoned or whatnot, but now like more about what the things that happen that cause that abandonment, or these other shortcomings. And then, I mean, as an evil DM now, it's a thing that I can trickle in later and bring back, or it's something that like the characters can now, when something like this comes up, like oh, I want to make sure that this doesn't happen to you. And that's worked really well. Tangentially, so I've been playing a lot of Baldur's Gate, like a lot of the D&D community. And the thing that I liked about Shadowheart was the whole wolf thing, right? You have this, and I don't know, you've gotten to that point or anything, but she's got like, this fear of wolves, and, she's ripping apart enemies and has no issue with being coated in blood and doing all these horrendous things. But then it's, oh shit, there's a big dog. And then you get to find out more about her backstory of, why that's an issue for her. But then, there was like mechanical penalties because you brought her to this fight where there were wolves, right? And then now she can't help out because she's too afraid of these things, and all that stuff starts pulling out of her. And so I like that, you can, even though you're in the spot where you're chucking dice, you can take that moment and bring that out. I haven't figured out a way to do it more than just these little guys. I want to figure out more ways of doing it because I think it was awesome. All the moments I've done it, I've run that one shot, I think like 4 or 5 times at Barhaven, and every time I get cool different answers. And then even these people who are just there for 3 hours are now far more attached to these characters than they thought they were going to be, because they're like, oh, I just want to play the stat block. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I didn't realize anything about my character, and now I know like their fears and how they're overcoming this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, it makes them a 3-dimensional person. Now all of a sudden there is some form of apathy that occurs, or not apathy, I'm sorry, compassion or empathy rather, that occurs, and it kind of crosses the boundary of just pure fiction a little bit. Now they're like, well, I can actually conjure up in my mind how this person would have arrived in this situation because of these circumstances. Now I kind of understand why they're so angry, why they rage as a barbarian. It's not just because they get stronger when they do it. It's, there's a reason. They're fighting something, and they literally have just weaponized that. What does that mean for somebody? What does that look like? Yeah, and even I think without having to delve super deep into a character's backstory, you can even do this in small ways, where it's things like somebody casts, I don't know, the Shatter spell. Okay, what does it look like when your character casts the Shatter spell? Because in my opinion, it should look different for every wizard and warlock and sorcerer and everybody who has that spell. Even within those same classes, it should look different. And that gives the player just a little bit of space to color the picture they want, to put something into a blank that doesn't matter what's there, but gives them a place to showcase something more about their character, which increases their investment because now it's personalized, it's custom. But and yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to simply just making sure that the narrative doesn't pause whenever initiative is rolled, like you said earlier, where it doesn't become a different game entirely. Bad guys should talk to each other. They should use each other's names, call out tactics to each other, instead of playing it like you're, an omniscient, chess master who's constantly one step ahead. You don't always have to play it that way. I think a lot of times that's where people fall into a trap of having an uninteresting villain. Is because they're so worried about playing their hand, tipping their hand to their players, that they don't show anything. And so they get to the very end of their story and they're like, this is the big bad guy. Why are you not all really motivated to fight this guy? Why do you not really care? Well, I had no idea that he was behind this other thing that we did, or I didn't understand why, he did this or that. You have to build that investment a little bit over time.
Right.
And I think that making sure that the combats are a part of that, that they come from something in the story, and that when they're done, it means something in the story. It changed something. That's probably the best way to do both, in my opinion.
Right. And I think, that issue that, a lot of DMs have with that, and I think it comes from a good spot, because they fall into this trap that I definitely was in myself, where you want the story to be interesting, right? And then you internalize interesting as unexpected, instead of, I can be doing this trope, right? And he's doing this, and like, oh, is he doing this for this reason? He's got to be doing it for that reason. And instead of being like, nah, ha, ha, you'll never expect why. But yes, this is the reason that I'm doing it. You're right. And leaning into that. And then one, it makes your players feel smart because they figured it out, right? Even though you were never hiding it to begin with, but they figured it out, and now they're leaning into it, and they're making all their decisions based on that. And even if that's not the thing, right? But now you could see that they've bid on this thing. Well, there's no reason why that's not the thing. And then you can lean into it because you see that that's a thing that like has gotten them invested, or that they're moving towards. And so you're like, yeah, let's now just switch, switch gears. Let's go in this way. And maybe this is why he's doing it. Or, hadn't thought that this person was the villain, but these people keep thinking that they're the villain. And, great. Let's make this person the villain. It's, if you guys care about him, then I care about him. And I think that's like why the Boblin the Goblin thing is always so popular, right? Because like, it's not a character people expected that you expected they would care about, but some little thing they started caring about, and they wanted that person around more. Well, you can have a hated villain, the same thing, that you want them around more, because the whatever encounters, whether it's just combat and like the way that they do things in combat, and talk to them, like, oh, I fucking hate that. Oh, I don't know if I can swear. Okay.
It's perfectly fine here.
But they no. This guy, we don't like this guy, the way that he talks to us, the way that he treats us. And then they're like, we're going to make sure that, we're going to get him now, or we're going to stop whatever this thing is now. Well, great. Let's keep leaning into this thing that you hate and keep pushing into it. And then yeah, absolutely. They're going to make sure that this guy goes down. And now they're invested in this thing, where before it's like, yeah, there's some dude who's got a book and is looking for a crystal, and we're the ones who have to stop it. So let's go across the world to this dungeon to stop this thing, because that's why we're here every week.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And again, like, I, as a dungeon master, it is no more fun to play a villain than whenever you've managed to make the player characters really hate that character, or maybe even the players themselves hate that character. Where they're like, the last time that we came across this person, like, we almost died, or I lost my animal companion, or, that NPC died, and that was a line too far. So like, this guy's mine, that's a great feeling. That you managed to do that with a fictional creation.
My Spelljammer campaign from a couple of years ago, I had this guy who was supposed to be like the face to the party of the evil galactic empire sort of thing, right? He's not the top of the thing, but the person that they're going to see around the most. And I spent maybe 30 hours painting this mini, right? And I was a fan of it. And I showed up in one of the earlier battles, and they saw this guy, and he had kicked a little auto gnome, right? That was his servant. And that just rubbed this one player so wrong that he'd kicked this little guy, that when they showed up, when they found this guy later who's on the ship, and like I had these mechanics of like, all right, he's got this getaway button that he can use as a reaction or whatever to teleport away, so he's fine. So I can have him for later. But the characters burned literally every single thing that they had access to, put them in like near death situation, because like no, this guy's going nowhere. He is going to die this session. If I don't care if I die, because he kicked that little guy who did nothing wrong. And so he had been around for like one combat thing where he was just there. He kicked the guy, and then like he was his little guys see all these horrible atrocities that were happening, and he's like, it's not affecting me. It's not affecting my profit line in the mines. I don't care. Let's get out of here. Stop wasting my time. And he was like, oh, I hate that guy. And so then when they saw him later, they decapitated him, right? And they brought his head, and we just took his head to show the little dome guy. He's like, here you go. You're never going to have to worry about this guy again. I was like, well, I don't know who I'm supposed to use now as the face, but like, and afterwards I was talking to one of my players, and it's like, I'm not mad. It's just, I wasn't expecting it. And he's like, oh, we can put him back as the big bad if it messes with the story. It's like, no, this is a much more interesting story now. Like, you cared about this guy. I was only bummed because I spent so long, painting the damn mini, that I only got to use it at the table for 15 minutes, because they killed him quick. Let me tell you, as soon as he showed up again, they're like, nah, this guy's done. No chance.
But it's its own reward as a dungeon master for me, especially being a dungeon master who puts a lot of stock in storytelling. When I've managed to pull that kind of emotion out of players or player characters, to me, that's the highest compliment.
Right.
Because it's not they thought about it and said, you know what? Thanks. I had a really good time tonight, which is great. I love that. That is very kind. It is a raw emotional response. That's a kind of high, as a dungeon master, as a storyteller, to draw that out of someone involuntarily almost, where they're so in the moment that they have forgotten whatever else is going on all around them, and they're in this moment. And they're just reacting.
That's the good juice, man. Like,
yeah,
it's the same thing. Like when, if you've done comedy, stand-up comedy, it's when you get those laughs out of people, but aren't like polite chuckles, but the one where it's like all of a sudden you made a connection with a complete stranger, and they completely understand where you're coming from, because all of a sudden now it makes sense in their life. That connection's there. And to them, it's like, oh, they're zoned in. You gave them this great feeling. Doesn't matter what's going on in their life. They had so much fun. And then that laughter that came out of them, that's the juice comedians go for. And it's the same thing at, like the D&D table, when they're in there and they're not thinking about stuff, they're just doing, right? And they're, they don't have to think, oh, what's my character doing? Like, oh, I now know what this person does. This is what they're going to do because of all this stuff in this pretend world. But to them, it's not pretend. They're feeling those emotions. Like, they're getting excited, standing up, their voices, getting raised or whatever. Best.
Yeah. I absolutely love that feeling. It's the dragon. We're always chasing the dragon. That's definitely it in the DMing sphere for me. So the few times that I have had the privilege of speaking with you, I've gotten the distinct impression that family is deeply important to you. And my question is, does your family game together? Board games, video games, TTRPGs, whatever. And was gaming something that you were raised around?
Yes to both. So we do board games, we do video games together. I have done tabletop games with my kids. It's harder because it to keep the attention of a 7 or 8 year old for a long time. So the sessions never last long, but
absolutely.
They like it. They're having fun. But we love playing board games together. I'm not a big collection in the board game sense, but compared to the average person, a large collection of, of designer board games, and kids love playing them. When I was young, like I would spend summers at my grandparents in Iowa, and this is before I had moved up there. And, we would play Rummy with my grandmother, right? And which is probably why I was so into Magic the Gathering, right? Like if you show up to like a game night or something and there's like a card game or whatever, I'm in. I'll love to learn a new card game. I get deep into the mechanics, trying to game the system, figure out the most advantageous way of playing real quick. So I love that stuff. But we played board games, card games a lot. But like we would spend a summer, at my grandparents, and every night we would spend probably an hour, hour and a half watching like Wheel of Fortune and then the news while playing Rummy. And I was 6, 7 years old, but then I was crushing my grandparents' friends when they would come over. Like I got good at it, and so my grandma was like, she was a seamstress, so she'd have clients come over, and then they would talk and like have coffee or whatever, and they would play card games. And they're like, oh, do you mind if my grandson plays? And they're like, oh, whatever, playing this kid. But I mean, I came for their pocketbooks. I was, I was brutal, but I love that aspect.
That's 6 more Werther's originals you owe
me. Right.
Amazing.
So yeah, we do board games. We try to do them, maybe a couple times a month if we can, where we're just doing nothing but just hanging out and playing with each other, because I think it's a great way to put these damn things down and just connect with each other and have fun. And that's the reason it's harder, especially now, to get people off of this while you're at the table. I never want to get into a spot where it's like, here's a basket, everyone throw their phone in the basket, you can't be on your phone.
Yeah,
obviously we all have lives, we're all adults, but I think one of the things that I love so much is, if you're spending 6 hours, with these people, and they're giving you that, undivided attention, and everybody's there together in the moment, and, you're bonding over that stuff. And then, later you're talking about it. So regardless if it's, tabletop games, like board games, we have board game, like New Year's we played a bunch of board games and drinks. And like we role play even in these little board games. So I like board games. Exports.
Yep.
Sheriff of Nottingham is one of my favorites. I don't know if you've ever played this.
It's a good one. Mm-hmm.
Here to Slay is like this little cutesy game. It's made by the people who made Unstable Unicorns, and it's they're like cutesy little D&D characters, right? So imagine a squirrel with a lute, and
some friends brought that one night. We did play that.
It's kind of like Munchkin, right? Where you're beating up everybody, and you're trying to assemble these little classes and stuff. But there's certain characters that this guy has a voice, right? That we do now, that somebody made this voice for this character 5 times we played ago. So now anytime this guy goes, it doesn't matter if you're trying to win or not. Now we're either trying to take that guy or kill that guy, because everybody loves this card. It doesn't even matter if it's good or not, but it has that emotional attachment. So we same with what's it called, Side Effects. This game, I've never heard of it before, but I was looking for a game that was also listed on Amazon as next day delivery for when we were doing a game night, because I was at $20 and I needed to find something else to get it over that threshold so I could get it in the morning, right? And it's just it's a cool another one of those style of games where you're throwing punches around sort of thing, but you have mental illnesses and you're trying to treat your mental illnesses with different drugs that have side effects that can give you other mental illnesses, and you can have somebody have a psychotic episode or whatever, and it has all the different medical conditions have different mechanics and stuff that can happen to it, and we're all on our own antidepressants and stuff like that in real life. So it's just and you can trade and stuff. It's hey, anybody have any antidepressant pills? I got the anorexia meds. I'll trade you. And it's no, my character's got impotence, but they can eat, and so you're just building a little character out of that, and it's just a dumb little game. But we anytime we get together, even before D&D, because it's a quick game, it's 5 minutes, and it's just one of those great things you can play while you're eating, and but it just gets that sort of thing too, where it for me it warms them up to being silly.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love that. Yeah, my group just recently started cycling. We have since 2000-ish, 2001. We have met and played weekly in person. And then COVID happened, and all kinds of crazy shit happened, and we've never gotten back on a full regular schedule ever since. And again, holidays happen, people have family stuff that they're doing and all that kind of stuff. Is perfectly fine. And so we kind of just slipped back to doing it just once a month, but we still wanted to get together. So we were like, well, let's just rotate once a month where we play Dungeons and Dragons, and then the other 3 weeks if it works out that we are able to get together and stuff, then we'll do board games and just hang out and socialize and, you know, stuff, since it hasn't been a while since we've seen each other in between, all that kind of stuff. So yeah. And I've always been a big board game person. Similarly, I was raised playing, you know, Clue and Monopoly and, you know, Pokino and, like, you know, Bingo and Uno and all of these kinds of, you know, games. And so I've always liked games. And then when I found D&D in high school, I was like, oh, okay, like, this is pretty cool. This is something different. It's like a game, but it's got this other side of it that's more like storytelling. And so then I got into college and got deeper involved in theater, and I started playing with a group of theater people. And that changed my perspective on the game entirely, because then it was just like, the guy who was running the game would look at the rule book ahead of the session, and then he would close his book and he wouldn't touch it the entire rest of the session. And there were points where the rules were wrong. And there was a part of me that was like, well, wait a second, you know, like, that's not how that rule's supposed to work. And I'd get hung up about it. But then I'd realize that what he was doing was far cooler, that it was a better situation, a better story than just falling back on what the rules said.
Right.
And then I was like, now I understand what this game is capable of. And yeah, it changed my outlook entirely.
I love that part too. And I feel like, in my experience, I think newer players, the creativity, when, like, if they've never played the game or even seen much of it, of what they can do with a spell that you only in your mind think of this one thing, and then they're just like reading the description and it's like, hey, can I just do this with this? And it's like not its intended thing. We're like, well, yeah, that's way cooler than what the spell's supposed to do. And it, you know, is it really breaking anything? No, but, you know, that it seems like you found a thing. Let's have fun with it. Let's run with this. Maybe, you know, that's just how the spells are going to work for the session, and we'll go back and, you know, later, you know, there was some weird, you know, ley line thing that was happening that allowed you to affect it that way or whatever. But they're just so, I guess, creative, because, like, everyone has their, you know, certain preconceived notions of what they're supposed to do, right? And I think, you know, oftentimes, especially with, like, how our education system works, right, we're supposed to color inside the lines, and they're too afraid to try to do things outside of that, right? And when you don't know where the lines are and all you're doing is, you know, like, well, I'm just doodling, let's see what happens, and great stuff comes from that.
Yeah, I'd agree. And again, it's something that you see a lot in people who have been playing for a long time, is their characters become just simply what's on the character sheet. You know, like, nothing against old school Renaissance games and people who enjoy, you know, playing like the meat grinder thing, where you bring 4 or 5 characters to the table and you're expecting most of them to die, and, you know, you give them stupid names because they don't matter anyways. You know, there's nothing against that style of play. That can be very fun in and of itself. But that's not the kind of thing that I want to play week after week after week after week for 20 years, which is what I can do with Dungeons and Dragons, or, you know, games that have kind of a long life to them. For me, at least, it still is fun, even though I've been doing it as often as I have for as long as I have. But,
you know, something I think, and I'm kind of putting it together now. So between my stints of D&D, right, I was really into Magic the Gathering, and at that time, a new format that's now like the most popular format was sort of created. It's called Commander. You have one of every card, and then you have like a champion of your deck, right? And it dictates like the types of cards that, you know, you can use based on that. But I was like a very slave to theme, right? So, you know, it's like I'd bring like a theme deck, or it got to the point where it's like I was trying to create an experience, right? Like using these things. Like I made a deck that, like, the whole point was all these weird random things, and I would make people roll certain dice that's to determine who's going to happen. And I made it like a game show. And so I started acting like I was a game show host every time I would play this deck, right? And so, like, creating that sort of experience. And so, like, that game for me was like, it was a board game that everybody brought a quarter of the board game too, right? And the game played differently every time because there's different things now interacting. And I think D&D is very similar, where it's like you're bringing part of the game, but everyone's character is like their own thing. And when everyone like treats it more than just, oh, this is mechanically what I want to do, but like, when they have their certain story, or you're trying to get someone to experience or feel a certain way, I think, at least for me, I get more enjoyment out of it. But at least when everyone's like in a similar mindset to have that experience, which is why like OSR works for OSR people, because they're all coming to that table for that super grindy experience. Like, I've never played any of those games. I want to try some because I think that would be fun if that's what I'm wanting to do. But that is a hard sell for some of my players, because like, I know my wife would be devastated if her current character just died, not thinking anything about it. Like, it just randomly died to a trap and they rolled wrong. She's like, well, I'm not playing this again because, like I bought dice that match her, and, I painted this mini and I have this sticker that represents her. And my wife's really into like stationery and pens and stuff. So her character sheet is like, it's like she's got her own notebook, and all the spells, like she's got like a page that has like what that spell looks like when they cast it. And so like if she triggers a trap and just dies, it's like, well, I've spent 4 days creating what my cantrips look like. Fuck you. No, I'm not. She's not dying this way. So that doesn't work for her. But the fact that she's putting that investment in is awesome for me, because now for her it's like, oh, it's really pretty and I like it, and I want my character to have all these cool pretty things with him. But now when she brings it out, and like, this is what it looks like when she casts create water, right? And this is what it looks like when she's casting Moonbeam, and I think that's awesome. So that
we need to get our wives together at some point.
It would be fun. We could do one of those things. And another reason I had to talk to you about this off camera or off the stream, that new location, I'm excited if they get it, because it's something that I can then bring my family to. My kids can run around and play, and we can game with like other gaming couples, because I think that the friends we have are that, but it'd be fun to experience it with others. So
yeah, absolutely. It sounds like they have a lot in common about the way that they engage with the game. So that would be amazing. And obviously you and I have a lot in common with the way that we engage with the game. So yeah, that would be fun. I killed my wife's character in that campaign that I was talking about, the one that was kind of based on East Asian. It was just a series of, they were in a bad fight and she isolated herself like right next to one of the main villains, and like royally pissed this villain off. So the villainess turned around and attacked her, got a critical, like she didn't heal before she went into combat. So it was just a series of events that just went really bad. But she was playing a rogue assassin, and it just so happened that the temple that they were nearest, the shrine that they were closest to, was dedicated to the god of death. So I posited, well, if anybody in the neighborhood is going to be able to help, it's going to be a cleric of the god of death.
Right.
And I was like, but it's not going to be just oh cool, here's the money that it takes to get you brought back, we're all good, have a nice day.
Yeah.
So it became this whole thing where her character was actually brought before the god of death, and the god of death said, okay, I'm willing to do this for you, but you owe me 100 innocent lives before you can rest, before I'll take you. So she agreed with it, and her character became so much more complex afterwards, and so much darker. And like, come to find out, towards the very end of the campaign, the other characters in the party discovered that she had been slaughtering like children and like all of this stuff behind the scenes, where my wife had been like passing me notes and all this kind of stuff, and making rolls in secret and stuff. And so at the very end of the campaign, the rest of her companions found out that she had been doing all of this, and they were like, what is going on? How is that possible? And so it led to this really interesting exchange and dynamic within the group. Even though when I killed her character, my wife didn't talk to me for 2 days because she was so
Yeah.
pissed that I did it. And I'm like, well, this is D&D. Death is not always the end.
Mm-hmm.
It sometimes just becomes a really interesting turning point in your character's story.
Yeah.
So, yeah, don't be afraid of dying. It's good.
So you were saying, like, oh, it's not just like paying the money and they bringing them back. So when these spells, like, when you're reading the spell description, like, has anyone thought of like how long ago these descriptions, what's 100 or 300 GP worth of diamond? Like, does inflation matter? Right? Like, you get what you think is that in diamonds, but that's a lot less diamond than it used to be, and nothing happened.
Spell component shrinkflation. That's amazing.
I mean, do you use spell components? Like, I don't get involved in like encumbrance and stuff because for me it's fiddly. But
Agreed.
I think like if someone's like into the flavor of like, oh, I got to grab these little things and make my little concoctions and words and stuff, it'd be pretty cool. Because I don't deal with it because for me it's not worth like the headache of keeping track of all of that.
Yeah, I've gotten to the point where unless it matters, I don't really get into it over gold and like mundane items and stuff. It's like, well, your character would have a lantern. That makes sense. I don't care that you didn't actually write one down or pay for it or whatever, and we're not going to sit here and say, oh, okay, you kill this guard, you rifle his pockets, you get 4 gold pieces. You go to the next one, you get 2 gold pieces and a silver. Like, this is how much you got out of the entire thing. This is what you collected at the end for whatever you were willing to rob or steal or, pilfer. But yeah, like, oh, you cut 5 feet off of that rope. Remember? I'm sorry. It can't reach. Like, I used to be that way. And it took too much time and effort away from what I was really enjoying about playing. So I just don't worry about it as much anymore. If somebody wants to have spell components be a flavor for their character, like you were talking about, then I am all on board for that. Absolutely. Let's do it. But if you just want to do the holy symbol or the spell focus or whatever, and just say that it's good, then that's fine. Unless the spell specifically says you have to have,
this thing. And the reason why is because it's crazy magic that requires whatever the thing is. On gold, so in this campaign I was thinking, because like gold is they would acquire a bunch of it and they would just have so much that it didn't matter, right? But in this one I've introduced, so I brought I have to sit on my desk all of these, so it's an East Asian thing. I don't know if you can see it. I put it up to the camera. These little good luck coins, right?
Yes.
And I have them in a bunch of them somewhere too, right? But like magic weapons and stuff, they usually just find them or earn them or whatnot. But I've given my players, like, they each had started with some amount of gold, and they would like take things like, oh, can I sell this for some amount? But they've had a lot more fun, and they're now like, they never bribed before, right? But now, they'll just like be interacting with the NPC and be like, oh, he seems sort of standoffish or whatever, clearly it's not worth the risk to him to give this information. And then they just reach into their little jingly bag, and because it's tangible to them, like, oh, would 30 gold change your mind or whatever? And then they give it to me and they don't have it in their thing. And they're like, oh, you know what? Let's go do stuff to get some more stuff, because they don't care as much about buying the weapons, but it's like, I want to be able to bribe this person. Or, it's like, oh, you know what? Can I help this person out? Maybe give them a little gold because they're struggling or whatever. And, or, one of their characters like, yeah, I don't care about gold. Like one of the characters in my game, his character is like a drug addict, right? And the whole reason they're adventuring, they're a barbarian, is they're just getting money so they can score their next, right? And
sure.
Yeah, they want the arc of like, they don't know whether they're going to, get clean or whatever, and what's happening with that, or something's going to happen and they're going to die from it. They don't know, but they're not really attached to material possessions because that doesn't matter. They're just searching that next thing. But it's cool. It's like, yeah, I don't care. As long as I get X amount that can buy this next thing from the herb shop, and you guys can have the rest. I'm satiated. But they now are like, what can I do with this gold? That the average person's like, oh yeah, obviously they don't make as much. Adventurers are filthy rich, right? And
Right.
so they're now, finding out, like, yeah, a bribe can go a long way. I can talk my way past the guard by, a little jingle of coin, where before they were just like, all right, so how do we sneak by to kill this guy and hide his body? And it's opened up new avenues just because like they have the physical thing in front of them, where when it's on the sheet, it's so easy for it to get lost.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely forget about it being there. Yeah, I agree. It's one of the reasons why I like to do magic item cards, so that they have like a physical thing in front of them. That guy at the meeting,
I have
Nick? Is that his
the
name?
laminator in my Amazon cart after talking to that.
Oh, nice. I have a whole video on my channel about how I make magic item cards from art that I find online that I think represents, I love finding a piece of art and being like, I can make that into a weapon, because I like using weapons in items that I've made more than the stuff just verbatim out of the book. That way there's a little bit of mystery. If you find something, it's not, oh, okay, that's a flame tongue,
I don't know if I can find this live. It's somewhere near here. I won't bother digging through my desk drawers for it. But I had these little wooden discs. They're about like an inch and a half. And I would use this punch. And like I said, I played a lot of Magic. So I had thousands of cards that aren't worth anything, right? But they have fantastic art, right? And so then I would punch out the art from the cards and put a little glue to put them to the tokens. And I had, in my Spelljammer campaign, I thought of a cool idea of like, because there's supposed to be pirates everywhere, right? And I was like, why are there pirates? So in all the other, D&D things, all the adventuring parties, they have a bag of holding, right? So I was like, it'd be really cool if bag of holdings worked a little differently. And when you're in the astral plane and there's all these like floating rock things and everywhere, every now and then you're going to find a cache this is where the items go when adventurers put it in the bag of holding. And this is why pirates exist, because all of this stuff is worth something, right? So like, this is why they're exploring everywhere, because otherwise, like,
dude, what a
ships
great
and stuff.
setup.
And so then I was like, well, they can't just all be there, because otherwise it's not very secure. So it's like, it's kind of like this limbo thing, and they can reach in and maybe find a couple of things. And so then I had this big bag full of like, I took all the artifact cards or arts from different Magic cards that had like an item in its focus, and then just stamped it, right? And then put it in there. But I didn't assign it an item. So then the identify spell was harder to come by. So then there was merchants, because if an entire pirate economy and black market is based on finding these things, right? So there's got to be somebody who can tell them what they do so they can assign a value to it. So then they go and take it to this person. And so then that gives me, time from the session that they find it to now figure out what the hell does this fucking thing do and how can I, put stuff to it.
That's brilliant.
And it was a whole lot of fun, because then, they like, oh, cool. Yeah, there's these random like spacey creatures that are on these rocks that are living here because there's something about the magic of the bag that's feeding these creatures, or they're feeding on the pirates that are coming to this. So they realize that if they find these items, pirates are going to come here and they can eat the pirates or whatever. That's how their whole thing works. That's why there's monsters there. And so yeah, it's worth either fighting it, because if you see those things, oh shit, there is going to be cool magic loot, and we don't know what it does, and I don't know what it does, and it was super fun,
dude. That's yeah. I'm flabbergasted. That's such a great idea. What a great!
And I think it doesn't have to be limited to like the Spelljammer setting, but I think something like that because the magic exists, right? And because magic exists, the world's going to behave differently, right? Because you're not the only 4 people that have magic, and if you are, then it's a wildly different game. But because it happens, like, how is it affecting everyday life? It's like, are you really going to be scrubbing, using your hands to scrub dishes if magic is something that you can just go to school for to learn, right? Like, I think that aspect of magic items, if they're plentiful, because for me, I love having them be plentiful, where then attunement matters, right? Where because I mean, I don't do like the whole 24 hours thing of attunement. For me, it scales with proficiency bonus, right? So as you're going higher, you can use more magic items. The stronger ones require attunement. And then, they can then just be like, okay, well, I want to use this one. And it has a cool combo with this one of the other player, but that means I can't bring this thing, right? And they get to think about it and like, all right, yeah, I'm ready to go to the fight. I'm going to bring these things with me. And so I think I'm not worried about like the balance as much because at the end of the day, I can scale things on my side, but they get to have their fun and really like find joy in certain things that you didn't really expect them to find the joy in. And they feel really cool about the character because now it's all kitted out and has all the cool things. And
Well, and oftentimes that will surprise you because you will not have thought of, a particular kind of combination of, abilities or features or what have you. And then you get to be surprised, which is always a lot of fun. Okay, so I have a preloaded question from one of the people in the community. And this is from Michael Barker. And he asks, what are the different ways an encounter can count, quote unquote? Which of these ways is most important to you as a GM? I know we kind of touched on this a little bit, but
okay. For me, it's, I mean, like I've said before, if it's driving the story forward, or they get to then they get more information about a thing, right? I had like an encounter where at the end, my player surprised me because like it was just something that was on the mini, right? And I saw it on the mini, and I was like, oh, while I was there, I was describing something because it was on the mini, and I was like, oh, let's bring this in, and I didn't think it was going to have a mechanical thing other than it just seemed like cool set dressing, right? There was a big Oni like dude who had spiritually protected himself there, had his little spirity guys fighting. Whenever they slayed one, it went into like the big ball necklaces that they wear around, right? And it's like it just went back into it, right? I was trying to say like, hey, when they die, he gets a little bit of health back. That was my way of explaining why he was like regenerating a little bit. And I described him the glow. Well, after they killed the thing, he's like, did his necklace drop? And I was like, well, maybe, right? And so then he's like, well, I'm going to put it on. And because I don't know what this does, but I want to find out. And his character is like just driven by kind of power sort of thing, wants to get stronger. And so now he's just wants to find out more about what this thing does and how he can get the powers out of it. And like I've made it work kind of like a limited wish spell, but he's not realizing it. He doesn't have a control of when he does it. So there'll be certain times where his character like will say a certain thing, and the way that they've worded it, it's like, well, now this thing happens, but there's a little repercussions because of the way you worded it, but they didn't realize they were activating it. And, it's kind of sentient in its own and was being mischievous and whatnot. But that encounter, to them now, it was, they were supposed to fight the things. Its purpose was like, oh, these are now like, this is the face of the stuff that's been bothering us for the past 2 sessions. Let's go find out more about this. And then the character's like, well, this thing that you mentioned, now I care about this. I want to understand this magic that they're using and how they're using this magic. So I want to move this thing forward. So like that was unexpected for me, but I think that's like a thing that you can then put into the encounters of like, did it drive the story really? For him, yes, but not really. That wasn't the purpose of it outside of introducing them. But now he's driven to find out more about this thing. Now I could create this thing, which is great for me. But that's things that you can put in the encounters of, well, now why are these people here? What was their purpose? And they get to go delve deeper. So even if it's not necessarily driving like the quote unquote main story forward, but it's now engaged, some of the players about new information that they now are caring about and want to know more about this one thing. And so as long as it's driving characters towards further action, I think that's what matters.
Yeah, and I think that my answer would be very similar. For me, that's the kind of counting that I'm referring to whenever I'm talking about encounters mattering. It's did the players get something from risking their lives? Was it more than just XP? Again, XP is great, but I can give XP for anything. And combat is just the only thing that the book tells you to give XP for. But
do you use XP at the table?
Sometimes. In my home group, we do, because that's the way that they prefer to track things.
Okay.
But in most of my online games, I use milestones. I look for a good point in the story where it makes sense that the characters have learned something from what they've been through, or a pivotal point in the story, or something like that. So
same, by the way, I use milestone for that, for the same reason I don't use encumbrance. XP is just fiddly for me, especially since I tweak all of the stat blocks and all the things and add, or just homebrew little powers and stuff, and it's like, I don't know how much this is worth. So
I found a really cool encounter app that I use, a website that I found that lets you calculate how many people's in the party, what their levels are, and you can do different rows. So if different leveled party members or what have you, and then you can do the same thing on the other side for monsters, and it calculates it out, and it tells you whether it's easy, hard, deadly, or whatever the different ratings are. And it's not perfect. Like, I have found that I pretty much have to set the combat to deadly and then like go up a CR or two. And that's usually the sweet spot for most of my games. That seems to be. But I also don't tend to run my games where I'm not interested in being like a hardcore dungeon master. Like, again, a lot of people in the community will be like, well, I've killed a few player characters in my time. It's like, okay, like, cool. Like, all of us have usually,
right?
But killing a player character as a dungeon master is not a hard thing to do.
Yeah, you have no rules you have to abide by.
Yeah, exactly. It's really easy. Asymmetrical warfare works great.
Yeah,
for the person who can make the rules up as they go. Anyways, but yeah, I like challenging my players. I want to push their characters to the brink of failure, where they question whether or not this is going to be the time, and then they pull it out of the fire. That's what I want to happen. But sometimes it doesn't go that way. Sometimes it's a cakewalk. Sometimes it's a TPK, which sucks, but it happens.
Now, do you track HP? And I guess we're getting away from the.
Oh, you're all good.
Do you track HP like traditionally, and then you like add and subtract as you sort of need to? Are you kind of still like hold on to that sort of thing?
So I track HP and I calculate it up, the right way and all that kind of stuff. I usually put most of my monsters between the recommended average and what the maximum is. So like 75% of max. That seems to be a little bit better. But I like for my combats to happen fairly quickly, because for me in 5th edition, combat typically is decisive after like round 3. It's pretty clear who's going to win.
Right.
And then it just becomes a matter of getting to the end.
Right.
So if I have managed to kind of showcase everything that I wanted the monster to be able to do, to live up to the myth and the legend of it, to deliver any kind of information that the party might need or what have you, then after that, I'm not interested in keeping the monster around a lot longer. And if after that point we're within 10 or 20 points of its hit point maximum, and the person who has like a history with this monster happens to get a pretty solid hit, then I would rather have the monster die with that attack, have the person who has the largest investment in the outcome of this battle describe to me how it comes down, that big cinematic moment of how they kill this person or bring them to retribution or what have you, then the wizard zinging it the next round for the extra 2 hit points that it had.
So I think that we've come to the same decision, but I have gotten rid of the numbers completely for me. I have
Okay.
like little boxes that I just put of numbers
You and
of
I talked about
satisfying
this.
hits. Right.
Yes. Okay.
And it has been so much easier for me to just keep track of things because, like, I don't have to. I mean, the math isn't hard, but anything that you're putting extra mental energy into, you're taking away from something else, right? So, like, it's I'm much better at
That's a fair
remembering
point.
all of my monsters' abilities, even when they're highlighted in different colors and underlines. And do not forget about this reaction. This is how this thing works, and then you forget about it. But my thing is, like, I find it unsatisfying, even if, like, unless it's narratively fits what they're trying to do, like when they decapitated my guy because they all went in for this one thing. But, like, if you start a big combat and then somebody rolls super low in initiative, and then the people, like, a people ahead of them crit really well or roll really well on damage, all of a sudden, like, they didn't even get to do their thing, right? Like, they didn't get to be involved. So, like, I just mark satisfying hits, right? So what that is completely arbitrary, right? It's little minions. I don't have to fiddle with their thing. If they're just guys or they're just there to, like, keep track, maybe it's 1 hit, 2 hits, 3 hits if they're tanky or whatever. And then the main guy in the center, depending on how long I want it to last, they have more, or, like, I'll even have things for me where they do a certain thing to regain a satisfying hit or whatever. It's the same mechanics of they're regaining HP, but it doesn't seem like I'm not like, all right, well, here's 2 more, here's 17
Right.
or whatever, because I got there from I started rounding damage, right? Like, I in blocks of 5, and then as they scaled up into blocks of 10, right? So if they dealt 10, boom, I'll mark 10 damage. If it was 3 damage, I'm not even going to bother with it, because the next it'll all average itself out. So now it's just, like, the monster's got, I have 6 players. Okay, it's got 12 satisfying hits it'll take, and I mean, I didn't post I was doing this with any of my players, so they're not going to see how the sausage is made.
Hopefully none of them are watching this. I think there might be a few spoilers.
But that's just how I've kind of arrived to, because to them, they don't know I'm doing anything different, right? I'm still, when they do things, still marking things down on paper. They think I'm writing the numbers down, just putting a little X. And if it was like a little hit, I'll put like a line and then, like a half an X. And then, when another one goes, put, finish that one out. But it's felt more narratively appropriate for how long that thing's been around, right? Like, yeah, a goblin has 7 HP. But, if you're level 7, there's a goblin there. Like, 4th, you had the mechanic of minions, right? You hit them, they're down, right? So if it's a thing that's just there to be the minion of the thing, and you just got a good hit on it, yeah, of course your good hit killed it, right? But also, like,
absolutely,
should, outside of something that makes sense, you smiting, and then because you happen to roll a 20, you weren't planning on smiting, but because you rolled a 20, now you're going to use your highest level spell slot to smite, and then is that killing its thing in one thing satisfying? Now, if it's the brother of my PC and their whole, journey in this adventure has been, I'm going to stack up all these things so then I can one-shot him. So when that does happen, it's probably going to go down that way, and I'm cool with that, and they know that's how it's going to happen, and that's what they want, and that is satisfying to them. But it's just made sure that the encounters feel more like, yeah, like what you were saying before, like, we've gotten to the point the monster got to show the cool thing the monster did. It's created that sort of tension, but the heroes have overcome it. But, oh man, well, you guys have to figure out how to do the last 30, and that was always unsatisfying. And so was, when you guys kind of cleaned it up, that kind of felt hand wavy, and it's very similar to that. But it's just like, have they reached this threshold? Yes. Okay. The next thing that they do that feels right, we'll do it. And I got there. I read about some kid who was running D&D at like a school, and he wasn't keeping track of HP because he felt like the encounter was over when he felt like it should be over, right? And I was like, okay, that's great. So I've kind of put that in there where it's like, HP doesn't matter, because you if I change it, right, at the end of the day, I can put less, I can add more. So really, do the numbers actually matter? Because There are clearly arbitrary as I'm crossing them out over and over and over again and keep increasing their HP because I haven't gotten to do the cool thing that this guy gets to do yet because I rolled a 2 in initiative and he doesn't get to go, which, by the way, I've started presetting initiatives for certain encounters. Saves me time, but also, like, if there's a guy in his little lair who's expecting these people to come, right? Yeah, he's gonna get, you might get the jump on them because he knows you're coming. He's heard you do all the traps and kill all those people on the way there. So yeah, he's gonna go first because he knows you're coming. So why leave that to a die roll when it's not nearly as satisfying as like, you've fallen into my trap and here's why. So I definitely walked away from that mechanical aspect and just tied the mechanics to story.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot to be said for, again, getting under the hood, tinkering with the mechanics, finding what works for you and for your table and what doesn't. And almost, it's funny because the way that you told this story is similar to some of the things that I've kind of implemented into my own games. It's coming across it and hearing that someone else was doing it and then just thinking, oh, okay, that we can do that. Like, you need permission.
Yeah.
There's this weird thing in our brain that, like, we need to have permission to, like, try to do something totally different.
Yeah, or reinforcing your idea, right?
Yes.
We're too afraid to take ownership of our game. And I love watching YouTube videos about all this stuff while I'm working. And lately I've gotten to the point where, like you said in the very beginning, they have their little click, you're doing your combat wrong and here's the best way to do it. And then I listened to it and I was like, well, that just sounds terrible. My players would not enjoy this. I don't think this is good advice. There's like, here, this is the exact way you need to do it. You need to make sure you have this and do this and do this. And it's got to be this CR. And like, I get, like, people need a starting point, right? When they don't know what's going on and they think this is the like they're trying to figure out a way to do it because you have to bring the information across somehow. And also when you're going to, like, a place where you don't necessarily know people, and I mean, outside of the other corporate decisions the company has made, I mean, something they understand is, like, people get together through this game, right? And so, like, you got to have a base rule set, right? And it's got to make sense in your way of doing it, but that it's all just a suggestion, and to not be afraid to go away from that. Because I mean, I've read, like, the lead designer guy doesn't even use the initiative that's in 5e in his 5e games, right? Like, I think they either go around the table and just tell what they do. Like, I have different initiative stuff based on, like, the type of encounter. So I love gelatinous cubes. They're some of my favorite little dungeon monsters. So I'll try to fit one in where if I can fit one in a campaign. So, like, I had players that were in a dungeon area with little traps, and they're just they're at the last stretch. They know they're at the last stretch. They're trying to get out, and their spelljammers at the bottom entrance of this thing waiting for them because they've used their comms device to, the guy who's they left on the ship to bring it around. Well, now there's this cube sliding down right behind them, right? And they're trying to run by and doing all these traps. So rather than rolling initiative, I was just, like, describing, here's some of the things you're seeing up for these traps and whatnot. And the cube's coming behind you. One person got stuck already. And it's like, you're trying to figure out how to get them out, plus get this. And rather than rolling, it's just like, all right, you tell me what you're going to do. You tell me what you're going to do. You tell me what your plan is. I'll roll a few things behind that, I've arbitrated. This is how, whether it's even or odds, whether that works or whatnot. And then it makes sense narratively to them. And it feels different than, oh, yep, this monster is behind you. Let's roll initiative because that's what we do when there's a monster and it's trying to stop you. But it doesn't make sense for me, it doesn't make sense to have initiative for, like, a blob that's all it's doing is moving towards you and going to eat you. Why do we have to spend now a whole hour of whittling down its hit points when it's going to do the same thing every time? It's going to advance its speed and try to get more of you inside as possible. It doesn't think. That's all it's going to do. So let's face this in a narrative way. And I've really enjoyed, like, doing some aspects of like that, or if it's they're sneaking up to some people and they're trying to find some, and they're like, all right, we want to try to get the jump on them, so I'm going to try to do this. I was like, all right, well, you're going to do this. What's your move to another player? What are you going to do when they do this? And they tell me everything. And then I make some rolls. And then this combat is not going to be a traditional combat because it's going to be chaos because now, certain people are surprised, certain people aren't. And all hell's going loose, especially like in a heist situation. I find like that sort of thing of just how are we dealing with the chaos? And if there's less order from the initiative thing, like, oh, I know I have, it can only move this amount. I'm good for like 5 turns before it can, catch up to me. But now it's just like, oh, this is the thing that's happening. How's my character going to deal with this thing? This is how they're going to deal with this thing. And just people jump in when they want jump in with how they want to do things. So I like doing encounters like that are less or that are more abstract.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've started doing chases as skill challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And I have found that it works much better if you just have, okay, everybody, it doesn't matter what turn in the initiative order that you would have rolled, just each one of you in whatever order that you want to describe to me what your character is doing for this portion of the chase.
Mm-hmm.
And when you describe it, be thinking of what skill that you're going to be trying to use for the skill challenge. Use that as a part of your description.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the person that wants to do acrobatics talks about how, there's a clothesline that's stretched from, one side of the street to the other. And their character is literally going to run across that rope as quickly as they can, trying to maintain their balance. Okay, cool. That's awesome. That sounds like acrobatics to me. So that's what you're going to be rolling for the skill challenge. The paladin, meanwhile, is trying to clear people off the street just using his presence and, booming voice. Okay, that's going to be a, persuasion or a diplomacy. But being able to approach the same problem based entirely in how they want to describe it, it still has the order of initiative, ish. It's, all of you are going to go, and then at the very end of the round, whoever you're chasing gets to go. But it's a little more abstract about who gets to go when and how to make that make more narrative sense. Because, the paladin who's clearing the streets now sees that the rogue is running across the tightrope, and he doesn't want anybody else to see the rogue, so that way they can stay hidden. So he has to, use his shield, bang on his shield for extra noise to draw attention, just that kind of stuff.
Right.
As a part of the description of what they're doing and building on one another and actually telling like a cohesive story through this.
I like skill challenges. I've run a few. I never played 4th edition. When it was around, I think I might have played like in a game day when those were still a thing, because like it was at the card shop and it was like, oh, well, my Magic tournament's not for 3 hours. Sure, I'll hop down and chuck some dice around. I don't remember much, but I really like that aspect of like, you get to try to do the things that aren't the combat, but that you put your skills into and you invest it in, and then lets certain characters shine of the things that like, oh, this is what I'm really good at, but I don't get to do that as often. But now it's like, yeah, of course, in the combat, the guy who can swing his big, crazy burning axe 5 times is going to do a lot of damage because that's what the thing is. But then it's like great when, in the chase, the rogue gets to run across the line and do all these cool things. But that's the thing that's why they're there in the party. That's why we have you here, is to handle this thing. So I like skill challenges in that way. And I tried running them like the way they're supposed to, where X number of successes is how you get there. I've kind of, again, just gone off to like what is satisfying, what feels satisfying to me.
Yeah,
and we get
absolutely.
there. And something that like I've been doing, and I didn't realize is technically rules as written, but nobody or very few people do, is like the skills, even though they have an attribute that they're next to, right? And you're proficient in that modifier.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
You're able to use them for whatever, as long as it makes sense. And the reason why they're in parentheses is because it's like, oh, for this check, it would make sense that they could use, their persuasion charisma or intimidation charisma, but you can definitely use your intimidation strength, to do it. And that makes sense too, of like, I played barbarians and, other strong arm characters. And it's like, I've always invested in charisma because I want to be intimidating. But it's like, he's not going to talk well. He's just going to like, hey, I'm going to pick up this thing and I'm going to crush it in my hand. And now you're going to listen to me because this could be your head. And I don't have to be, good looking and charming. You just realize that I'm very strong. You should probably listen to me. Otherwise, that's you. And I like that aspect of, well, yeah, I have this thing that I want to do, but, like, is nature really an intelligence thing? Like, my druid doesn't have much intelligence as on the thing, but I'm certain my guy who grew up in, the woods is going to be able to identify this plant based on just being around it all the time. But for some reason, because we have to assign it something, they're like, yeah, well, you could learn it in a book. So it's probably, we're going to say nature's intelligence. And so I like having all that being a lot more loosey-goosey of, you tell me what you want to do. And like, I try to get as much away from the mechanics as possible when they're trying to describe your intent. And I will figure out and arbitrate the rules to it if there needs to be a rule or a roll or something. But getting them away from this is what it says here to like, I want to do this. How can I do this? This is the thing that I want to accomplish. So if you're the rogue, like, I want to get from point A to point B. Is there a way I can do it on the clothesline? I see the clothesline there.
And I think what you said is an important word in that, and that's intent.
Mm-hmm.
If the intent is to simply squeeze out a little extra like power for your character, or to game the game, a little bit more, just so that you can kind of be like, pat yourself on the back that you figured out a loophole or whatever, I'm much less likely to let it go.
Mm-hmm.
But if you come to me and you're like, oh man, I just realized that this ability that I took actually functions this way, but it only really makes sense with my backstory if it does cold damage instead, or whatever. Mechanically, it makes no difference whether fire, cold, if it doesn't change something or break something, or even if it bends something a little bit, but it's really the intent is that it's because it's going to be fun for your character.
100%.
Then yes, absolutely. Let's do that.
In my Spelljammer game, one of my players wanted to play a plasmoid, right? Thought they were really cool. And he was like a druid life cleric, but a wildfire druid life cleric combo. Cause his whole thing was, I want to make good berries, but I want to call them goo berries. And I want them to heal people really well. So he took the life cleric dip. So he's like, I want them to, generate more healing, but I want to bring a bag of gummy worms or, whatever gummy bears. And then if you take a good berry to eat, I'm going to hand you one and you're going to have to eat it to get that HP. And it's a lot more HP than it normally is, but he's going to hand that out. And he's like, as a wildfire druid, I get the more healing, which is why he took it, right? For the mechanical aspect. He's like, my character would not care about fire, but can I have my little guy I summon just be a little blob of goo that I just put out there, and all my spells that are fire spells are now acid spells because they're all just ooze flavored? And it's like, yeah, absolutely. And he had so much fun. Like, I don't think he cast he never wild shaped, because to him that wasn't a thing that his character would do, right? It was like, I'm going to bring out his little companion, and he's going to spit little acid things, and I'm going to be running around the field. He took the mobile feat so he could move around the field and hand good berries out. And yeah, by the time he was like level 6 or 7, his good berries, and plus like he got a cool magic item that also improved, the healing of his good berries. And they were like way better than potions, and he could make them all the time. But I was like, all right, you know what? They only last a certain amount of time, for a mechanical thing. He's like, oh yeah, I don't care. So then he's just like, yeah, I'm sprinting across the field using the teleportation ability of my guy so I can get over there, so I can give you these gummy bears, and then I can get over to this guy and try to heal this guy with my things. And was it far more powerful on paper than it should have been? Yeah, but was it way cooler than if he just showed up like, yeah, I chose this combination so that I can max out how much Goodberry does, and let's just have a bunch of these and then we'll just like scarf them all down after combat. And so it's like, yeah, you know what? You guys can bonus action eat these good berries. So that way he can have his his idea. Oh, excuse me.
You're good.
His idea of what was fun for him of moving around. And then, well, the rules say you got to do this in action to eat it. And now, are you going to spend your whole action to heal? Because now you can't do your thing because he wants to do his thing. No, just scarf him down. Let's go.
Yeah. I definitely, a friend of mine introduced me to doing potion use as a bonus action. And then I started playing Baldur's Gate, which is also the way that functions in that game. And by that point, I had already started implementing that into my own game as well. And I'm like, yeah, that's definitely the way that it should be, in my opinion. If you want to give it to someone else, okay, that might be an action to administer a potion. But to quaff one on your own, yeah, it's a bonus action. That's fine.
What? Not very I mean, like you can
at all.
To me, it's like these weird arbitrary rules that are there because they have to make them, right? Put them in a line, but it's like you can move your hands in such a way while holding this symbol to summon interdimensional beings to come fight for your aid. But the ability for your body to move quickly stops at that. So uncorking a tiny little vial or whatever and doing that, no, that's the same amount of times it takes you to swing your axe 6 times. Yeah, go for it. Like I do the bonus action ones, but you roll for it. And then if you want max healing, you do the action thing. And then you can get the maximum out of your potion because that's what you're wanting to do. And or because I also use those luck dice that they can spend as an action to heal.
Oh, so, that's right.
So
yeah, which would they have make a big difference.
They could do with that. Like I don't care about them being powerful. They should be powerful. That's why we're here. That's why they're invested in it.
Yeah.
So let's just give them more things to show how cool they are.
Amazing. Okay. Another question that I brought was from another friend of mine named Jason Smith, and he asks, "How often will you throw a curveball encounter in the mix? Would you use one as a way to introduce a different layer of the story?"
So by curveball encounter is like a thing they weren't expecting?
I guess that's what he's talking about. Yeah. Something that would subvert their expectations.
Okay. I mean, I guess you can't do it often enough. Otherwise it's not, then it becomes the expected thing. But yeah, I mean, if it makes sense, right? Like I guess that's the biggest thing for me is, at the end of the day, the encounters got to make sense for why they're doing it. I'm not just gonna do it because it's gonna catch them off guard. But like, if it's they're sleeping through the night and something happens at night, just because I rolled on a table because whether or not to stand guard. But if it's for something that night and they normally don't worry about it or something, but the faction is like really secretive and they're trying to take somebody away, I've had that. Like they took a PC away and they disappeared in the middle of the night because they were like, oh, well, yeah, we're going to hand wave being vigilant or whatever. But also it just made sense that to introduce this faction to them, right, that they're very sneaky and below board about everything that they're doing. And so, yeah, they're not going to face you head on. They're going to wait till you're the most vulnerable to get to the things. And they wanted to get something out of that character. So yeah, they're going to grab this character and now he's in their possession. You guys need to go back and get him. And did that happen because that person wasn't going to be there, that week? Sure. But it was a convenient way for me to now do this thing. They weren't expecting it. And then they're like, oh, wait, okay, I know we're going to go to bed, but, how are we going to handle, does somebody want to stay watch? We normally don't care about that, but clearly now it matters. And yeah, then eventually, I don't keep throwing it every night because then it doesn't matter anymore. But I think that stuff is very useful. You just gotta, if you keep throwing curveballs all the time, the batter is going to realize it's just a curveball every time, and they're gonna hit it. So you just got to mix it up.
That's true. It's a good way to go with the analogy there. And yeah, I mean, it's exactly like you're saying. Like if you are subverting expectations constantly, then it's not special.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think that it's perfectly okay to go against the grain, to surprise your players. I think you should. That's how you keep things that are like, one combat every other session or one combat
Mhm.
every session. That's how you keep it fresh, is
Mhm.
by adding a little bit of something that's not expected to it. Throw a troll who isn't affected by fire into the mix. I, it can bite you in the ass. I actually had a player that ended up leaving a long-term play-by-post game that I was running, because the fairies in the setting that I was running are kind of like feral. Like they
Mhm.
bite people and they're not very nice, and they're all this kind of stuff. And the person got so upset because that's not the way fairies are written in the book. Fairies don't have a bite attack. Like literally, it came down to like that kind of a back and forth,
Oh yeah.
and they ended up leaving the entire campaign over it, which was a little silly. But people on that site were kind of silly sometimes. Um, but like, just because you're using a lot of the information out of the book, and we've talked about this quite a few times already, but just because it's in the book doesn't mean that you have to run it verbatim.
Mhm.
Have a one of the best encounters in Baldur's happens fairly early. Spoilers if you haven't gotten this far. Now's your time to turn back. Okay. But very early on, you come across the ogre who has the helm of intellect or whatever
Mhm.
on. And it's amazing. It's such a great encounter because it subverts the expectation of what coming across three ogres is going to be like.
Right.
So it's easy to do something simple that ends up changing it just enough that it isn't a gotcha.
Mhm.
It's that's not a lot of fun. But where as a player you're going to go, oh, I didn't expect that. Like I had no idea that was going to happen. How cool.
So, I'm
Um,
gonna bring this back to
yeah,
baseball as a person who
sure.
doesn't play baseball at all, but it it works because it still fits into what makes sense, right? So, like, say you threw that curveball, the fairies biting. They have teeth. They're mischievous. Maybe they're more the Celtic mythology version of fairies, right? But so yeah, it was a little bit outside the box, but you can see how that was still called a strike, right? But if you throw
Yeah,
something that is in the dirt and it doesn't make any sense, and we've all come to the table that like this is the way a certain thing works, and you're just doing it, and you're like, no, that was a strike. Then you're like, well, this doesn't make sense because of the things that we've all agreed upon. But when it's like on the outside, like, oh, okay, you know what? Every arm strike is a little bit different. This guy calls them a little lower than it need to be. You're going to adjust to that. You now like, okay, this is a thing that we have, right? And when it changes a little bit, that's fine because you got to keep the things going, but it's still believable and it still makes sense. And that's the thing
right.
that I think that matters. Like, yeah, it makes sense in this world that the fairies would bite. They're, I mean, if they're going to hold you based on a, hey, can I have a little bit of your time agreement, and they're being in the literal sense of, I now own part of your life because you agreed to this. How is biting outside of the realm because it's not in the book, right? They literally just got 2 years of your life because of a, turn of the word. So yeah,
Yeah,
that makes sense. And so I think
absolutely.
that's the key is that like when you those curveballs are there, they still have to make sense of what you're doing, why it happened,
Hmm.
and it subverted the expectations, but it was believable, right? Like if you're always throwing weird things out and it's outside of what they're thinking, then it's like not fun to them because nothing that they can expect to reasonably happen is happening. And so everything is so out of there that you still gotta, they have to know the rules of what they're playing with. Otherwise, they can't
Right.
engage with it.
Right. Exactly. They don't know what is okay, what's not. And again, like it starts to strain the expectations, that
Mhm.
they had sitting at the table or playing in that particular game. Yeah. Um, on the second part of Jason's question, would you use one as a way to introduce a different layer of the story? The one that came to mind for me was in the same Baroque game. Their kind of rival faction for a large part of the campaign so far has been a group of assassin vampires. And they had suspected that an NPC, a particular NPC that they had history with, had become a part of this group, but it hadn't been proven yet. So the tension had kind of been building with this NPC, and this NPC shows up uninvited to like a dinner party. And everything is real snippy and biting throughout dinner and all this kind of stuff. And they basically come to a head, and they tell her that she needs to leave. And she starts to walk out the door and says, well, actually, I don't think I'm going to be doing that. And she turns around and she produces a glass perfume bottle that she had on her, and it was innocuous and all this kind of stuff. But she then shatters the perfume bottle on the ground, and the mist that's contained inside of it is actually several vampires in gaseous form that have been hiding inside of this glass bottle the entire time. And so now the combat that they thought was going to break out, or it was all of them versus this one NPC, just didn't frighten them very much. Now all of a sudden there were 4 vampires in this room that they had to contend with. So it definitely was a curveball for them, but it also introduced, as a part of the story, the fact that for sure this NPC was working with this faction of vampires, and that they have powerful and potent magic and are able to utilize it to their benefit. Mm-hmm. So to answer Jason's questions, yes and yes. I think that it's a good practice to use curveballs, although not too frequently. And then absolutely you can use them to elevate and move the story forward. Cool. So we have rounded the 2-hour mark, like greased lightning. So yeah,
I'm quite long-winded.
Oh no, man! Like I love it. I'm here for it. This is what I like to do. This is what this show is for, is to have the opportunity to sit down and pick somebody's brain for a couple of hours. And I knew the couple of times that you and I have had the chance to talk, I knew that you would make for a good guest, because you formulate your thoughts and your opinions on something quickly and are able to get that idea across really well. So I was really excited whenever you agreed to come onto the show. So thank you very much for that.
I mean, thanks for having me. Like when the last time that, we were, nobody showed up, but I think we were still there for a good hour, just
at least
talking shop, because I mean, you get to learn so much from just figuring out, because everyone sees the game differently, right? They all have their own experiences and what they're doing. And I mean, that's the big thing of like, I mean, even this, to take everything we're saying with a grain of salt, because
yes,
who knows what's right for your table isn't necessarily what's right for mine. And that's why, like, all these prescriptive things that are all over YouTube, right, that I have issue with, is because, I mean, sometimes that's not necessarily stated. They're like, yeah, this is the way that, it's worked for me, so this is the way that it works. And like, I know if I did things this way, I don't think my table would have fun if I prescribe to the things. And it's the same thing for you. Like, if the OSR, like 12 character sheets, let's roll up, and if that's what's fun for you guys, then absolutely, because that's the thing that I think that matters the most. So
yeah, absolutely. There's a good friend of mine, Matt Click, and he put it the best way that I've ever heard it, and it's definitely kind of become a part of my mantra, and that's fun trumps story trumps rules.
Mm-hmm.
Like in that order. Like if you're having fun, then the story doesn't matter as much. And if the story is going well, then the rules do not really matter that much. And don't sacrifice one of these other things for a lesser tier.
Yeah, and the rules are there to help get you to both of those things, right?
Right.
They
to facilitate that. Yeah.
When you're starting and you don't know what's happening, these rules are here because you know what? If you follow these rules, your prop, we can get to a story, we can have some fun, because they are fun rules. Like, even if it's just rolling the dice and doing this from a wargaming aspect, this will be fun to some people. But then you'll realize that the moment that you kind of deviate it for a little bit, because, oh, you know what, I had this idea, we're going here because we're following what's happening there, and then just the willingness to run with it, the situation of why improv works, right? Like, you're just enjoying what's going on and enjoying the other people's company, and as long as everyone's open and honest about that part, then everything else falls into place, and you're gonna have a good time.
Yeah, and there is, that's part of where the magic of this hobby kind of comes from. That's where you end up losing yourself for just a little bit, where the whimsy kind of takes away with you just for a moment. And those are the moments that I think, at least for me, the moments that I'm always chasing. That's what I'm looking for.
Right.
Is, that part where I could swear I was there. I could swear that I could smell the things. I could hear the sounds, because that moment I became so wrapped up in what was happening that it kind of became a little bit like a real experience, a real memory for me. And our brains kind of work in a funny way with that, with memory and with, what is actually a sensory experience versus what is just kind of a recorded dream. Our memory doesn't differentiate between a lot of those things. And so for me, at least, it's really cool moments where all of that kind of comes together, and I feel like I'm standing beside my friends on a battlefield, and I feel like we've, bled together, and, the camaraderie that's kind of come up from that, and the fact that I know that they're going to have my back whenever I'm down, all of those kinds of things from an encounter can help elevate the rest of your game, the rest of your story. I live for those kinds of moments. Yeah. Well, man, this has been an absolute blast. I'm really, really, really stoked that we got to do this, and I'm looking forward to having more conversations with you at some point.
Yeah,
either online or off.
I'm gonna try to come bother you on Monday. So,
dude, absolutely, please do.
Friends, so we'll cause havoc at the table for you. I got a fun pro wrestler character I've been wanting to play.
All right, challenge accepted. Oh man, cool. All right. Well, do you have anything that you want to plug or anything you want to say?
I mean, I'm not nearly as active on the internet as I used to be. But if you come out to one of these Barhaven games and you want to sit down and have some fun, I'm all there for it. I mean, if you're in that Discord, I mean, I really don't message people I don't know outside of like those sort of spaces. But if you hop in that Discord and want to say something, or you can put a little comment down there, and I'll see it and get to you. But I try to keep my private life private and that sort of thing. So
hell yeah, man, there's no shame in that at all. Not at all. Yeah, man. Yeah, I'm really, 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 really thrilled that this was a good conversation. I'm really happy that you came on, man.
Hey, when we go off, I do have a question for you, but it's not related to this.
Yeah.
So.
No, absolutely. I'm looking forward to that. Okay, so for those of you who might have watched, it didn't look like we had a lot of people watching live with us, but I'm sure there will be people who will watch this later on and catch up. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for consuming the content. Do all the stuff that YouTube likes for you to do. Hit the like button, subscribe, share the link around, all that kind of stuff. It really does kind of help the health of the channel here and encourage me to keep doing stupid shit like this. No, I love this, and the fact that there are people out there who find this entertaining is fantastic. It's a really good feeling for me as a creator. So, thank you very much. I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Last kind of thing that I say before going out every night is that free action. Blah, 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 blah. I told you I'm a professional. Being kind is a free action. It costs you absolutely nothing to be kind to another person. You'd have no idea what that other person is going through. But if you can give them the gift of kindness, which is absolutely free for you to give, and it might possibly make all of the difference in the world to them, why would you not go around giving that gift out for free? and the world sure as fuck needs more kindness in it, especially right now. So go forward, be kind. All right. I think we're going to go ahead and call it an evening. So until next time, may your dice roll high and your snacks always be within reach.